I joined Facebook. Originally was going to become a PM, then was told, oh, there's this thing called data science. Would you like to do it? It sounded more like my jam. And I was like, oh, that's great. Let me try that. And then once I started down that path, the management thing sort of just happened organically. It was a period of like rapid growth. And I think it was right place, right person, right fit. And it was an opportunity to kind of take on this team and grow it. And I just kind of leaned into that opportunity. I love the details, right? I want to tell you exactly how I built the model, exactly all the features I threw into it, all the interesting things I saw. And I've lost you about a minute into that conversation. If you are a PM or a strategy person and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. And so I think this idea of really starting with the so what, the PMs or the engineering leaders who are trying to make the decisions about what to do, what to ship, what is the right thing to invest in, with a period of rapid growth also means a period of a lot of uncertainty. Even if there's tremendous upside, it's still a period of uncertainty and kind of high stakes decisions being made, while also needing to move at a high velocity, right? So really trying to think in that context, what are the decisions that are the most leveraged ones, and how can I proactively think about how data might be able to help, and not always saying, oh, you know what, I don't have enough data to model this thing, which is the case, right? Like if you've not built the product yet, of course you don't have data on the product. That does not mean that as a data scientist, you can't be useful in thinking about what could be. So how do you find sort of proxies? How do you find parallels? If you think about the skills that make up a good data scientist, data engineer, a good professional in general, like a lot of the skills, technical skills are quote unquote learnable. So I think a lot of technical skills are cultivatable, but as a manager, when I'm hiring somebody, attitude is the one thing that I can't change, right? Like I can't teach you to have the right attitude. I can't teach you to have a growth mindset. I can't teach you to be curious. Those are things that do have to come innately. So the person themselves would be well served by cultivating those traits in themselves. So I would say really be curious, be hungry, think about what is most useful, how to add value, and really have low ego and high curiosity in the endeavor to do so.
Welcome to Beyond Brilliance. I'm Jay.
And I'm your co-host for today, Rahul. Today we're sitting down with someone very special, a fellow alumni from PhD Tech, and someone who's had a very fascinating career trajectory in data leadership.
Yeah, we're talking about somebody that's got a PhD in medical imaging, McKinsey consulting, building Facebook's monetization analytics, leading responsible AI, connecting merchants and customers at Shopify, and most recently, she's shaping community connections at Nextdoor.
Everyone, meet Vandana Mohan, a data leader, a patent holder, a board member, and someone who's learned to navigate uncertainty by staying hungry and flexible, as she puts it. Vandana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That was very kind. I hope to live up to that in the rest of this content.
Yeah,
Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vandana, again. So, okay, let's get started with your initial journey, right? The way we do this is try to get a little bit of juices going before we get started into the deep trenches of data. So you began with a PhD in medical imaging, then you pivoted to consulting in McKinsey, and eventually you found yourself into Facebook doing data leadership there. So that's exactly not a standard path, right? It's not a standard path at all, but any stretch of imagination. So what's that thread that connects these seemingly different worlds for you?
I mean, looking back, data and extracting value from extracting real world value from data is the thread or the through line I can see to all of that. And now that I've named it, it's the through line I think I'll continue to follow for the rest of my career. But at those moments in time, I think it was a lot about learning as I went. And especially for us, at least for me, I'll say coming from a fairly small town in India, the more I did, or the more I saw, the more exposure I got to, oh, what else is possible and what other opportunities could I pursue? And so I think kind of the scope of what is possible has expanded the more that I've done, and I've then had more to choose from. But again, like Rahul was saying, kind of staying hungry and off the choices available to me at any point of time, what has felt most impactful and hopefully most fun is, and hence sustainable, is how I've made those choices. But yeah, I think the common element is I really enjoy all aspects of data, like whether it is munging data in a spreadsheet, I don't think that's, unsexy or what have you, or it's building an ML model, or it's trying to figure out how to use and build kind of AI agents. All of that I think is really fun, just as long as I can see what is the impact from doing that. That applied aspect is what I enjoy. But yeah, I think that would be the thread that connects all of these experiences to me now.
That's a very honest and relatable career arc, if I can say that.
Let's zoom into your time at McKinsey. It's a place known for shaping how people think, especially in structured problem solving. How did those 2 years shape your ability to translate technical insights into business language? And what's one consulting skill that you still use daily?
Great question. And to be very transparent, I think a lot of the work, and this was before McKinsey had sort of a true data science presence, right? This was quite a while ago. So I would say a lot of the work that I did at McKinsey wasn't quite technical by the same standards as I might use to describe the work at, let's say, a Facebook or a Shopify or now Nextdoor. You're not using deep statistical tools largely. You're doing more pragmatic, more scrappy, more applied kind of analysis, which doesn't lessen the impact, but just to say the thing, that's the shape of the work. And so I think in terms of the skills that it helped me hone, the first was just being able to more quickly develop and state a point of view, or you can call it a hypothesis on any given new problem domain, because obviously a lot of what McKinsey is trying to build is kind of the generalist problem solver archetype that, hey, we can train consultants and, again, like you said, the right ways of thinking and operating, and we can throw them at different problem domains and they can quickly imbibe the context that is necessary by asking the right questions. And again, you can't just keep asking questions, forever and ever. At some point, you got to start trying to synthesize and say, okay, here's what I understand the problem to be. Here's what I think the answer is. And that was very hard for me coming from a PhD background because, you take months and sometimes like years to get 40 data points to then run a statistically sound model and then publish a paper versus here you're like, this is a new problem domain. I've spent all of 4 days at the client side talking to clients about it. You want me to tell you how we should solve this problem? I just genuinely don't know. But I think the important skill kind of in getting past that was it's okay to not know for sure, but B, the way to move your thinking forward and the collective thinking forward is just to state a point of view. Okay, here's my hypothesis, and here is why I believe that to be true, which may or may not be right. But by stating it in those terms, you are moving the collective thinking forward, and now somebody they can tell you maybe why you're wrong in the things you believe and hence help you refine that point of view. And you're all sort of like better for it. You're moving the problem and the solution forward. But I would say that's actually number one skill that I've taken away from McKinsey. I feel like I used it today morning, right? Just like every single day of my career, I feel like I used that skill and it has stood me in really good stead as well. And the other part is just around communication, right? Again, coming from a more technical background, I think one of the things, I know I'm guilty of this even now, I still catch myself doing this, I love the details, right? I want to tell you exactly how I built the model, exactly all the features I threw into it, all the interesting things I saw, and I've lost you about a minute into that conversation. If you are a PM or a strategy person and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. And so I think this idea of really starting with the so what, like kind of some basic context. So, the person isn't grasping at straws, but okay, here's what we went to look at. Like we looked at posture regression or what have, retention, what have you. But then here's the TLDR. Here's what I found. Here's what I think we should do about it. It's just a really great place to start the conversation because then in probing into whether that is the right thing to do and how to do the thing, you end up having a very rich conversation, which does get into all of the details about how you did this amazing analysis, but it's just anchored in a very impact-oriented framing that the other person actually has incentive to engage in, and you're not kind of losing your audience through that. So I would say those are the two big skills that I kind of took away from McKinsey. If I had to kind of really synthesize them up, is sort of how to build a point of view quickly and to keep iterating on it, but kind of also be updating it as your priors change, and then just communicating better, which again helps you do the first one a lot better as well. But yeah, there's a bit too.
Yeah, that's great. That bit about forming a hypothesis before the data is fully cooked. It's critical for avoiding that reactive trap that so many data teams fall into.
Totally.
Yeah, it's very true. So Vandana, you've got patents in medical imaging and social media classification, which is quite rare. I find it very fascinating that you have patents in both. How do you personally strike this balance between being both an operator and an innovator? It's kind of, I feel like they're poles apart. I want to learn more about this.
And that's a great question. And actually, for the record, I know some humans who do this really well. Like they do both really well. But for me personally, when I was younger, and again, this is probably what led to the choice to do a PhD and The path at that point was I was going to go do like hardcore medical research. I really thought innovation was the end game, right? Like I have to do something new. I have to do something that was never done before. And by the way, those things are really hard to do, right? Very few researchers truly hit that zenith of research, of like doing something completely new or what have you. But I think over time, what I started to enjoy more was whether or not this thing is new in a publishable way, it is really useful. Like I can see it drive outcomes in the real world. And again, to each their own, everybody should pick the poison that works for them. But at the end of my grad school experience, and we were doing research on brain imagery, and the 40 sample example is a real one, where I had 39 samples. It wasn't quite enough to publish a paper on. And I waited almost, I think, 2 years. It was intraoperative brain imaging, and you had to wait almost 2 years because somebody had to go under the knife, right? And be okay with data being collected. And that's just what we had to do. And we published the paper, and then it's been almost 10 years since, and that thing still hasn't hit the market. Not for lack of good intent or a ton of hard work, but it's just a much longer horizon to landed impact. And I just personally realized that I prefer more ongoing validation and more ongoing feedback loops on the things I'm doing. So real world impact, finding ways to apply this was more satisfying to me. And then in the course of doing that, and that's where the social media patent came in, or there was one at Shopify as well about kind of a similar product, it was more in the course of solving a real world problem. If we can find a clever way to do this, then I would like to protect the IP around that in the interest of the company, right? And that's where sort of like the patents have come out of since then. But that's sort of how I see it now, is I see myself as primarily an operator, and the innovations are a happy side effect when they happen. But that's definitely been a pivot over time, and trying different things and seeing what feels satisfying enough for me to follow the path of, right? So to each their own.
Gotcha. I mean, I love the shift, right? Like from chasing shiny things to driving real outcomes. That's what I'm hearing as a thread there. Yep. So it says a lot about how your mindset grew also as your career takes shape. Your thinking changes, your perspectives change. Totally. So it's great for sharing that story.
Totally. And I have really good researcher friends who have continued down that path, because again, that has felt really validating, and I just have deep admiration for anyone who can wait 10 years, 20 years for a real world outcome. But I think we need a little bit of all of these energies in the world. So, yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to your days at Facebook. You were asked to build monetization analytics during this period of massive growth. Can you talk to us about your journey and some of the decisions you made during that time?
Totally. So again, like a lot of starting experiences, it was somewhat serendipitous. Like I joined Facebook, originally was going to become a PM, then was told, oh, there's this thing called data science. Would you like to do it? It sounded more like my jam. And I was like, oh, that's great. Let me try that. And I'm really glad. The recruiter who did that is still a friend of mine. I'm so glad for that pivot. And then once I started down that path, the management thing sort of just happened organically. Like you said, it was a period of like rapid growth. And I think it was right place, right person, right fit. And it was an opportunity to kind of take on this team and grow it. And I just kind of leaned into that opportunity again. So I would say a lot of the early days were learning by doing, and sometimes by doing badly and making mistakes and learning from those. But I think a few things so I'll maybe reflect on a few things that I did that I thought were really good and hopefully might be useful for earlier career humans to think about. And then some things which are mistakes I made that maybe other people can avoid, right? So I think one of the things actually that worked really well was being very close to, again, the impact, right? Of like, okay, the PMs or the engineering leaders who are trying to make the decisions about what to do, what to ship, what is the right thing to invest in. And again, with a period of rapid growth also means a period of a lot of uncertainty. Even if there's tremendous upside, it's still a period of uncertainty and kind of high stakes decisions being made while also needing to move at a high velocity, right? So really trying to think in that context, what are the decisions that are the most leveraged ones, and how can I proactively think about how data might be able to help, and not always saying, oh, you know what, I don't have enough data to model this thing, which is the case, right? Like if you've not built the product yet, of course you don't have data on the product. That does not mean that as a data scientist, you can't be useful in thinking about what could be. So how do you find sort of proxies? How do you find parallels? Like in the early days of video, as an example, we didn't have video ads yet, but we did have some video content. So how do you think through and model the what ifs in a way that we can all kind of critically think about this strategy and figure out whether investment is the right thing to do, what have you. So just really thinking proactively about what are the most high leverage decisions and how can we best support them, even if imperfectly, right? But just how can we best support them as data and not wait for somebody to come and ask us, hey, give me this specific data point or that specific data point. But just really showing up as a partner, I think was something that McKinsey probably taught me was right to be an owner, and that served me well in retrospect. So that was, I think, a thing I leaned into a lot. In terms of the team itself, I definitely indexed a lot. Again, coming as an IC myself, I definitely indexed a lot and likely over-indexed to technical skills and shininess. Again, given my background, if you were a really deep statistical thinker or if you were an excellent coder, I would think you're an amazing IC, right? And so there's a lot of over-indexing to the technical part of the job. And I think over time, pretty rapidly realizing that, again, the same applied thinking that I took for granted in myself, I needed more of my team to be able to scale it. This was sort of one learning. So kind of the applied thinking and also the owner mindset, right? Of how do you, again, think of what the business needs and put it above your own ego or about your own need to do cool work. Just like, what does the business need and how can we most efficiently accomplish that together? Those traits were things I started to look for a lot more. I think in humans, as like in the first year or so, I think I already started to realize, I need to start thinking about these other aspects in my hiring rubric a lot more. So that was on the hiring side of the house. But I think it was really a case of, by doing these two things together, we were able to, I think, contribute meaningfully to the product and the business team's outcomes. And organically, when that happens, when the pie grows, we all have more to share in, right?
So one thing you did that a lot of companies struggle with, you successfully integrated data science, engineering, and product analytics into a single unit. How did you make those different functions work together so well?
It's a work in progress. Maybe I should acknowledge that first. But a few things that have helped. I think the first is just to have every subdiscipline or whatever terminology you want to use there, have its own unique value proposition and sort of mandate clearly defined. And by that, I mean like that the individuals in that function, but also like other individuals who are their stakeholders know like what good looks like for this function's output and hence how to work with them to maximize that goodness. And then also like the individuals in the discipline know how to grow, right? Like for example, in some of the early days before at Facebook, we sat and defined, okay, like what is DS versus DE? Sometimes we would conflate that to become senior DEs, you basically have to act like a DS. And that's not quite true, right? Like these are different career journeys and there's different skills. And obviously always adjacency with other disciplines is a really good way to amplify your own impact. Like for example, I think a lot of my adjacency with product management and engineering and like, can I kind of lean into those roles if I really had to? And that helps me honestly be a better data professional, right? Because these are roles I interact with so closely. But kind of the same principle within the data subdisciplines I found to be useful that, hey, like really have empathy for, try to understand the workflows of each other, and that makes you better at your core job. But we should define what that core job is and provide clarity on it for the humans doing that job again. So everyone can see, okay, like I have a path of progression. I know what good looks like. I can aspire to it. I can make it happen in my everydays. What does good look like and how to make that good better in your swim lanes, basically. So that's the first piece. And then the second one I've also found is just making sure not to ever imply any relative value judgment between these functions. And not that anyone ever has bad intent, but sometimes things can happen where, like let's say data scientists speak to the work of data engineers or ML engineers speak to the work of data scientists or what have you. And it's just sometimes a matter of convenience of who's speaking or what have you, but just trying to make sure that in the opportunities for broader recognition or identity building that I'm thinking equally about all of these. So again, it kind of reinforces that, each function has its own unique value to provide and it's non-trivial. It creates pride. And when people have pride in what they do it better, right? So that's kind of that virtuous cycle that kicks in. But those are two principles that I found really useful within my data org. And then I think those same principles, I also work with other sort of function leaders to make sure data overall is treated on par with like other functions, not as a service function. When data humans do the work, a PM should not just speak to it. Like the data person should speak to like the things that they learned, the implications that they found. So, but those same principles of clarifying what good looks like, and so we can aspire to it every day, and then making sure they are recognized for and can feel pride in the work that they provide and the work that they do. Those are two sort of principles I use within data and more broadly, and I think those have really helped with integrating them well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep, absolutely. So at Facebook, Vandana, you made decisions that have basically affected billions in revenue and millions of users, right? How do you build systems that are robust enough to carry that responsibility without sacrificing speed?
That's a good question. I will cheat and say having great engineering partners really helps. Because I've both lived through having them and not having them, and having them is way better. Because the reality is with a lot of, like, if you're doing data science or data engineering or ML engineering, you're downstream of the humans who are responsible for logging the right things. And for example, if you're working with partners who declare success by building features without logging the data, you're in deep trouble that you can't just claw out of. Like you do need the upstream things figured out. But I would say, in the absence of being assumed good partnership or just know-how, actually creating that mandate that, hey, having good data is something we all share responsibility in. And this is the role my org plays or I play, and this is the role I need you to play to be able to sort of do this is really important. For example, if you have a process around product development, how do you make sure that engineering cannot just move on and declare success if they cannot do basic reporting on like just basic usage stats or what have you, right? So at least like basic logging hygiene is handled. That's one kind of feels like a trivial example, but makes a really material difference in collectively having data, first of all, let alone better data. So that's one aspect of it, is structurally creating shared responsibility about data outcomes, I think really helps. And the other part of it is, I think, investing in good foundations and reusable foundations ourselves. And in that, I mean being intentional about, okay, like how do I think about this business or this product area that I'm responsible for, that I have adjacencies to? How would I model this out? Like, for example, like again, since I still think in relational data, sorry, that's just like my brain still works that way. But like, hey, what are the entities? What are the relationships? What are the things we need to be able to understand? Even if somebody tomorrow doesn't immediately have a question, which is a very tactical way of thinking about it, what is it we need to be able to understand about our system? And now let's just systematically try to make our data assets better to be able to do that more easily, so that the things, you don't have to like do 6 joins to answer a fairly simple question. If somebody asks it tomorrow, you can try to think ahead, right? And so I think, yeah, so shared accountability with engineering or upstream partners, and then like very intentionally starting with like a business mapping, but kind of feeding it into ongoing improvement of data foundations. And I think 2 things I've found helpful, because a very good problem to have is suddenly you have a ton more users, a ton more advertisers to analyze. And I want to be prepared for that good problem, right? In the sense of, I have the data, I have the history I need, I have modeled relationships, and I can start to answer some of these questions. And again, that's a really good problem. Maybe we all have those problems. But that's sort of, I think, the 2 pieces I've found really helpful.
It's amazing. Actually, you touched on a lot of topics there to unpack, really, right? You talked about shifting left the responsibility to the engineering teams also. Talked about the data foundations, having a proper hygiene to go back and answer questions in retrospect.
Yeah, so let's shift towards your leadership philosophy. It talk about your values and action. So you've led teams through major changes at Facebook, then to Shopify, and now at Nextdoor. How do you maintain your team morale and clarity when the business is constantly changing, pivoting? And how do you keep them focused on the mission?
Again, I feel like this is one of those things you can probably learn all through your career and never say you're done. But the things that I find helpful that are in my toolkit so far are, I think, number one, you need to know as a leader what direction you want to go, and hence what direction you want to take your team in. So it kind of goes back to having an opinion and having a point of view, even if you don't have perfect data yourself. And really, business uncertainties basically means you don't have perfect data, right? Like that is stable over like long periods of time. So I do try to always kind of and if things are changing very rapidly, maybe every week I revisit versus every month or every quarter, but just on in some kind of ongoing basis, my own perspective on like, what do I believe we should be doing as a company, and hence the data organization is something I try to re-clarify. And then to create clarity for the humans on your team, I think setting that broad strokes direction or vision, whatever the non-loaded word you prefer, is really useful. So everybody knows, okay, this is the broad direction we're trying to go in. But then you also have to make it real, because, without making it real, actually that kind of broad direction can make life more miserable for people, because they don't know actually how to progress in that direction. And so what I've found useful on that is saying, okay, let's not plan out 5 steps or 10 steps. The data foundations is a great example for this, right? Like, maybe we have all of these concepts that we want to have well modeled. We have a finite set of resources and competing priorities. Let's pick these 2 things and let's start making progress on them, and then rinse and repeat, let's say every 6 weeks, every 4 weeks, whatever the cadence is that you choose, which is a function, again, of how rapidly things are changing and, kind of how much stability you can promise your own resources and kind of stick to on that promise. But that's something I found is, okay, set the broad direction. And by the way, that direction can shift, and that's okay. As a leader, you're allowed to change your mind. In fact, it's a good thing if you do when information changes. But you should communicate it as such, that this is where we're going. And then here's the immediate steps we're taking that's going to progress us in that direction. And on the other end of these steps, let's figure out if that's still the right direction and what the next set of steps is. But just doing that exercise and becoming more agile at it is maybe the mechanism I'm still working through, because this can take up a lot of time itself, right? Kind of planning and replanning. And if that happens on top of a very rapidly changing environment, it's going to hurt more than it helps. And so I think when I first started doing this, it hurt more than it helped. I almost abandoned it and then realized, no, I just need to get better at how quickly I can replan. And so having like a backlog of steps, at least in my own mind, even if I've not put everybody else through the pain of thinking through them, helps. But coming up with tactics to be able to sort of recheck your direction at frequent intervals and figure out the tactical next steps in that direction at a high frequency, those have really, I think, helped to do this in practice. And that's still a work in progress. I feel like I still take about a week to do that now, and maybe I can get it down to 2 days, and that would be amazing. So,
Yeah, so that was such a thoughtful and honest look into what it really takes to lead through change. So now you're at Nextdoor, a platform focused on strengthening communities. How does leading data for neighborhood connections differ from e-commerce or social media advertising?
First of all, we also do ads. So there's still advertising in my part of the world, and I think it's a good business model. So I'll just kind of say that. But that said, I think what I find most different is like the product context is different. So the mission of the company is different. And I think kind of imbibing that mission or those values is like, it kind of flows through to everything. And so, for example, Nextdoor specifically, we really want to drive community connections and value real world value for neighbors and humans in their communities. And we don't want to solve for just sort of clickbait or engagement or what have you. So that does change the paradigm of, okay, how do we think about success, right? And then how do we identify good proxies for that success that we can operationalize, whether for measurement and KPIs or in our ML models or what have you. So I think thinking through the context of the product, and in this case, the local emphasis, the community emphasis, the real world value emphasis has been like a pretty material difference. And that's a function of the mission. It's what brought me here, but it's a function of the mission and the business and all of that. And then the other aspect, I think, is kind of contrasting to commerce, now not so much social media. Again, in commerce, you're trying to drive sales, right? For better or for worse, you want to drive sales, you want to drive repeat sales. You can dress it up very many ways, but fundamentally, you're trying to get people to buy things. And so success is somewhat easier to define, right? Like you drive orders, you drive repeat orders, you drive more orders, right? Like that's, you minimize returns, right? Like it's sort of a paradigm that's fairly repeatable. But again, like in general for social media, now having worked at sort of 2 different entities, defining success is harder, and sort of keeping a really honest view that, hey, all metrics are only proxies. When it comes to social media and, this kind of world of, hey, you're trying to solve for humans, the very sort of amorphous needs and wants that you're trying to solve for, success is very hard to define. And any proxy loses its meaning over time. So how do you keep bringing it back to, wait, what is success? Is this truly success, or are we just chasing like a local optima that A/B test started to show us? Like, let's kind of step it back. That, I think, is the biggest contrast between like all forms of social media, I would say, and sort of, and then within social media, like I said, the nature of the value proposition for each platform is different. So thinking about that is the other piece that I overlay.
That's great. It's really fascinating to hear how data leadership shifts. Thanks for giving us a glimpse into what thoughtful, mission-aligned data work looks like at scale.
I want to take you back to some reflections, right? Like some personal reflections in this segment of the episode. What I want to talk to you about is the inflection points within your data career, right? You've seen it all. You've had very different roles at different points in time. So I want you to look back and what's that one moment or a few in your career that actually shaped you to be the data leader that you are today?
That's a great question. In the interest of time, I'll maybe pick two that kind of looking back now. I think the first was sort of my early years at Facebook. And there was, so my manager at the time, he's now one of my mentors. I'll mention Chandra Narayanan, amazing person and a very respected data scientist. And so I was hired to work on a particular problem, and so I went to work on the particular problem in true McKinsey style, where I was like, well, this is my understanding of the business. Like, forget what you asked me. This is what you really need to solve. I'm going to go talk to people and figure out how to solve it. And that happened. I went for whatever, like, I think 4-6 weeks, and then I did a readout, and then the senior stakeholder I was working with was very happy with the output, and then it was all good. We kind of went from there. Afterwards, Chandra shared with me how the senior stakeholder had a lot of concerns with how many questions I was asking a couple of weeks into the project. And I thankfully was oblivious to this, because of course I'm going to ask questions. Like, I need to know what it is I'm solving for. But what was interesting about this was that Chandra trusted my process. Of course, he knew I told him what my process was, and he was very hands-off with me to like go do what I needed to do. And he hence implicitly encouraged that sort of acting like an owner mindset that I was bringing to the table, because he was like, of course, okay, your feedback is fine, whatever it is. And he just didn't tell me, because it would have thrashed me to know, oh, wait, this is the feedback. Do I need to correct for it? What have you? And at that point, I was junior enough that it might have materially thrashed me and hurt the goal. So I think the things I took away as a data leader from that, I think about that a lot now when I'm managing other people, especially early career people, is like, one, acting like an owner, always a good thing. Try to encourage it and just shape it into constructive ways, because sometimes there's maybe some anti-patterns to that too, right? Where you're trying to do somebody else's job for them, and that's never a good thing. But really do act like an owner. Really try to understand what you're trying to solve so you can put your best out there. And then the other piece, which is, that as a leader, as a manager, that I'm not a pass-through filter, that I do need to sort of be thoughtful in what and how I pass along feedback to humans on my team. And that not all feedback needs to be passed either, right? Which was a pretty amazing thing to me, that you can be a really amazing coach, but only if you are filtering things in the appropriate way and helping people shine with whatever spiky edges make up their shape and persona. So have you? But that was, I think, a career, like very early moment in being a data scientist that I think put me on a really good path and shaped a lot of my values as a data person, but also as like a leader to other data people. So that's one. And then the other one is, I think, just the experience at Shopify, kind of going from only managing data scientists and data engineers, who again, like implicitly are primarily a decision support function, right? To also owning ML engineering and owning kind of decision making now. And there was just, I think, a lot of increase in empathy of, when you're a decision maker and you have to bear the consequences of sometimes making bad decisions, how do you still keep going and how do you find the right balance? I think that was really good learning for me. And then just a lot of technical learnings around things around offline evaluation is not a well-solved problem, right? There isn't almost any literature on this. It's still something you have to think through in this context. Just a lot of sort of soft skill, emotional resilience kind of learning, and like actual technical learning as well. But I think it was also a really good inflection point because I personally enjoy ML systems a lot, and I think I'm better for that experience now. So.
Excellent. I got two themes there. One was like make early career mistakes. Have a good manager or a mentor that can help you with or support you with that quest, and also like the technical pivots that you had, like managing data teams first, and then now increased responsibility managing ML teams. Data leadership often means navigating through a lot of ambiguity. Even touched upon this topic of not having all the context in the world and still making decisions, right? Can you share a time where the path was not so clear, and how did you find signal in the noise, and how do you go about it? Is there a playbook that I can refer to from your experience?
Yeah, I don't know if it is a playbook so much as it's a set of behaviors maybe that I found helpful. But I would say one context, since I mentioned the Shopify experience, maybe I'll build on that, right? Is in the context of Shop, which is the area I led data for, and it's the consumer-focused parts of Shopify, which is a very merchant-obsessed company. So it's a part of a much larger organization, but a very different primary stakeholder that we were solving for, and hence a lot of differences in the agility with which we wanted to move, or the data scale that we worked with, or things like that. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty with that, right? Because we were doing a bunch of things in terms of defining like what the product should be, rebranding the product, thinking through kind of how we really massively up-level the ML sort of an intelligence in the product. So there were all of these like product and back-end things we were trying to do. And at the same time, as a data discipline, we were going from everybody being a data scientist to essentially like, to kind of Rahul's earlier question, defining sub-disciplines within data and saying, okay, how do we, and again, this is not an organization of like 10, 20, even 50 humans, right? Like so I had done this informally for my own team, and then we started to do it for the entire company. And now the complexity of the problem really grew. So we had to put a lot more structure around something like this. And it created a lot of uncertainty, right? Of, hey, like, do we have the right number of ML engineers for whatever work we do need to do? Do we have the right shapes of skills for that, or for data analytics engineers, or each of these sub-disciplines, basically? And so it was a sort of collision of product and sort of technical uncertainty with people uncertainty. And I think that was, a really hard time to kind of work through. But the thing that helped, and then things that I think I could have done better, but like the things that did help, I think are, again, trying to stay really close to product leaders, right? Or the business leaders of, hey, we are a public company, right? We have real people, again, users and kind of merchants who use our platform, and we can't let them down. So what do we need to keep solving for the stakeholders who do rely, again, these are real humans, right? Like especially the merchants who use Shopify or Shop, their livelihoods often depend on it. So like, how do we make sure we're doing the right thing by the stakeholders who use our platform each month, each quarter, and kind of keep the right goals and guardrails to keep progressing on that? That I think that as a thing we did and checked on together really helped. It was just very grounding, right, for lack of a better word. And then the other piece I think that helped is being as transparent with the people that are most impacted by the uncertainty, right? In this case, again, we have I had a team of 50 people, and everyone is a bit unsure, like what is going to happen, like will we redefine disciplines, will a bunch of people get fired, like just what is going to happen. And I think being transparent about what I do know and what I don't know, right? And I'm a big believer in, I'm not God, I don't know all the things, but here's the principle of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to solve for, and I'll do my best to do right by the people. But I think just being transparent and over-communicating to the extent that I could was a really useful thing. So at least people knew, hey, I have somebody in the mix who's trying to do the right thing, who's trying to keep me updated, right? And sometimes in uncertain situations, not knowing is worse than anything else. Just helping people know as much as possible really helped. And then I think the other part of it is, I genuinely think, everything else aside, at work, people most thrive when you're working on hard problems together and you can see the impact of like, oh, you and I are working on something really hard. And when we start to see momentum, when we start to see progress, it validates everything else. It makes everything else kind of surmountable. So just again, going back to that sort of setting a direction, taking small steps and then celebrating those small steps when we hit them really helped. That, okay, this is what we're here for. And this helps us also to keep our skill sets current. It helps you to feel more validated as your reason for being here. But I think those three things sort of together just help navigate the uncertainty. But why are we here? Keep doing more of what we want to do and just be open with the people that you don't know all the things. And here's what you're trying to solve for. Those three things help.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for such insightful learnings from your career. So for our listeners that are starting out in their data careers, like very early stage, what's one piece of advice you'd give them?
One piece of advice, I'm going to cheat and give two.
Please do so.
Maybe there's a third, which is, hey, it's okay to cheat sometimes as long as your intentions are good. But I would say the first is, again, I think just being curious, being hungry, right? And having the right attitude is very important, because if you think about the skills that make up a good data scientist, data engineer, a good professional in general, like a lot of the skills, technical skills are quote unquote learnable. And I don't mean to diminish, like, there's probably statistics experts somewhere there who's saying, I just spent 10 years cultivating my expertise. Yes, but again, you spent 10 years and you could do it if you put your mind to it, right? So I think a lot of technical skills are cultivatable, but as a manager, when I'm hiring somebody, attitude is the one thing that I can't change, right? Like, I can't teach you to have the right attitude. I can't teach you to have a growth mindset. I can't teach you to be curious. Those are things that do have to come innately. So the person themselves would be well served by cultivating those traits in themselves. So I would say really be curious, be hungry, think about what is most useful, how to add value, and really have low ego and high curiosity in the endeavor to do so. That would be my number one advice. And then my number two is just a bit more like in this world of AI and all of these things. One of the concerning patterns I see sometimes, right, is when you start over-relying on a piece of technology to do a thing that you don't know enough to critique. Now what is your value add in the world, right? That's, I think, a very risky path to go down. So I think just when you're using tools, any new tools, but especially now AI, just being really eyes wide open about, hey, with respect to this domain or this skill, am I an expert who can totally steer the system confidently? And so I can, quote unquote, use the AI to outsource a lot of the tactical things? Or am I a beginner myself? Because all of us are beginners on something, right? So I think of this myself on some new things I'm learning, that, oh, I'm a beginner. I shouldn't just have AI write all of my code for me or what have you. You can use it as a learning companion to help you think through, but why, or point me to references, point me to sources, but just be smart about how you use the tool so that you are cultivating what is the human value you can provide in your future job. I think especially for people starting out today, that's something to be really thoughtful about. We didn't have that risk when we started out.
That's true. It's obviously a great reflection there, Vandana. Thank you so much. Yeah, you need to know how to drive before you speed on the highway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I was reminded of the quote from Steve Jobs, right? You stay hungry, stay foolish. But anyway, perfect place to wrap up. Everyone, if you enjoyed this deep dive into data leadership, share it with someone who needs to hear it.
And if you're wrestling with any of these challenges in your own career, we'd love to hear more from you, because the best conversations that can happen can come from the listeners that's listening to this. Be part of the discussions. Give us your comments and let us know how we can improve this.
Yeah, until next time, stay curious and remember, ownership of end outcomes is what separates the good from the great.
Yes, and we had one great conversation with Vandana Mohan. Thank you so much. And thanks for
doing
listening to
this.
this episode, everybody.
Thank you for doing this, guys. Thank you for having me.